Gene vision, the vision to make the right decision.
Let's call today's topic Some Reading Lessons. This is all about the tales of using correlated response, progress by selecting for highly heritable traits, and obviously the role of visual assessment. One very interesting topic in animal breeding is the inclusion in selection programs of traits or properties that are related to those traits of real economic importance. Practically, this means breeders will select for one trait, but with the prospect of improving a different one. Any scholar of animal breeding and genetics will know that just about all traits, except maybe some influenced by single genes, are somehow related. This means selecting for one trait will inadvertently also favor the selection of a different trait, usually either unfavorably or, if you're lucky, favorably, sometimes just a small influence. Examples abound, both practically and in scientific literature. Usually, single trait selection results in more long-term problems than sustainable solutions. Best practices therefore clearly shows us that the ultimate way to achieve success is to include all traits of biological and especially economic efficiency in a combined selection index, where each of these traits are weighed to their relative economic contribution and the relationship or correlation then to other traits. Back to the main topic, namely the value of indirect selection rather than direct selection for the desirable trait. Maybe this can be best illustrated by means of a practical example. It is generally accepted that female reproduction rate is the main driver of economic efficiency, or we can also call it profit, in beef cattle herds. It will therefore make a lot of genetic selection sense to select the more fertile animals as parents for the next generation of calves. The objective is to select those that will carry over the good properties to their progeny, rather than those that will perform well but will not pass this on to their calves. A sensible approach is therefore to record these traits in such a manner that the full spectrum in the reproduction performance is captured, in good and bad years and seasons. The important part is to do this objectively, giving each animal a fair chance to perform against its equals or peers. It is therefore a very well-known fact that the variation among the animals in the expression of any observed or measured trait, in this case now reproduction, is the result of each animal's genetic ability for the trait, but also the environmental effect on such expression. Only a portion of the genetic ability, we also call that the genetic merit or breeding value, can be passed on to the progeny of each animal. Merit is such a nice word, as it depicts the differences amongst animals rather than a fixed value. It is therefore a ranking from very desirable to very undesirable, relative to those considered for selection. There is therefore no place for absolute values, no bragging rights about weights, no bragging rights about calving interval. The ranking is more important than the absolute value. Since genetic merit requires taking only the genetically transferable portion of the variation in consideration, that is exactly what is achieved with BLUP, best linear unbiased prediction breeding values. The so-called additive gene action for the trait is included relative to the total variation. Only that part that can be transferred to the next generation. Scientists might call this the heritability in a narrow sense. It is very important because it means that BLUP breeding values already account for the heritability of the trait, irrespective of it being deemed to be too low to be selected for. Genetic merit values for cows and heifers in terms of fertility, therefore, are the result of direct measurements with a built-in assurance for the heritability of these traits. And furthermore, also takes pedigree and other relationships with SIPs into account. The only two other aspects that needed solving are where the female was too young to be measured or where a bull without measured daughters is considered as a replacement, as the trait is a sex-limited trait. Female fertility can only be recorded on females. These challenges are dealt with by including genomic information in the form of SNP or SNP recording in the equations to predict the genetic merit. This is a topic of another day or article. Now, all these sources of information have been included to accurately predict the genetic merit of females and potential herd size for female fertility. The alternative sometimes suggested is to select for fleshing ability or the ability of females to maintain body condition as a correlated trait to female fertility. The following reasons to select for fleshing ability are given. In the first place, it's easy to observe. That's a good argument, but so is fertility, and it's easy to define and quantify the traits and properties contributing to female fertility. The second argument is that it's highly heritable. Therefore, selection progress will be faster than selecting for female fertility. Now, the counter-argument here is that heritability estimates only play a role in traits where breeding value predictions do not account for this low heritability. In the case of female fertility, the blood breeding values take care of the level of recorded differences that will genetically be carried over to the progeny. So the heritability is accounted for. The third argument being used is it can be observed early in an animal's life. This is obviously true in terms of maturity type, for example, observing cannon bone length or other body observations, but not for the trait itself in mature females. This can only be recorded once a female calves and she has to take the bull again. The same arguments can also be used by applying practices such as overmating of replacement heifers, where you mate more heifers than you need and only keep those that actually took the bull. The next argument is that fleshing ability, and especially maturity type, is directly linked to adaptability to the environmental conditions, therefore favoring the best adapted animals. I think this is a very good argument, and as it can fast-track selection for better adapted animals, especially for nutritional challenging environments. So this is a good argument. The last argument that I just jotted down is that fleshing ability is highly correlated with female reproduction and therefore warrants being selected for, as it will lead to favor the more fertile ones. This might specifically be true, but not generally true. Why select for something if the real trait can be measured and recorded very accurately, and breeding values are available for the trait that you want to select for? So, maturity type, fleshing ability, and/or ability to maintain condition are very important traits or properties in beef cattle, and therefore warrant consideration in selection programs. This should, however, be done for the right reasons. Fast-tracking the establishment of a cow herd that are better adapted to environmental constraints and market demands could be a very good reason. The second reason that comes to mind is where reliable records are not available. For example, where females of outside origin or without proper records are introduced in the herd. Visual observations are then very crucial. South African stud breeders, recording with SA Stud Book, have the luxury of access to the best scientific aids available globally. The ability to peep inside each animal's genes has become more possible today. The real challenge sometimes is to make use of these aids and apply them correctly, but still use common sense to select the right animals. Visual assessments will always play a crucial role in making the final choice in selection, and among others include one or more of the following considerations. These considerations are to identify properties of importance such as calving ease or problems with calving, tick tolerance, heat and humidity adaptation. Another consideration is to observe faults, especially those faults that you can observe on the live animal, such as other and teeth deviations, scrotal, epididymis or testis faults, undesirable sheaths and navel skins, skeletal faults and undesirabilities such as hoofs and leg faults, influencing walking and serving ability, skew and crooked face, mouth and jaw deviations that will influence grazing ability, and lack of skin pigmentations. And then lastly, to consider any other trait or property of biological, economical importance that's not recorded properly and can only be observed. Then finally, the take-home message. It is better to measure accurately rather than to rely on non-objective and non-recordable traits. Secondly, include all economic traits in selection programs in a sensible way. Thirdly, blood breeding values account for heritability estimate differences amongst traits. The next one, visual assessment is a key to selection if used correctly. And lastly, faster selection progress is achieved through direct selection rather than using a correlated trait and relying on the correlated response.
Gene vision, the vision to make the right decision.